All right. Have you ever really let that passage resonate with you, just marinate inside your brain and inside your heart? It is a fascinating story that shows up. So we know that the persecution begins when? Acts chapter 8. But did you ever stop to think that this one guy who spoke his piece actually prevented the persecution from starting in chapter 5? He's still in opposition, but he prevents the persecution and delays it, at least for us in how we read things, 3 chapters later. He prevents it for at least 3 chapters by simply saying what? Guys, here's my advice. Leave these guys alone. We know what has happened in the past. We know we've already killed their leader. So let's just see what happens. Let's just let the thing fade away. Let's just let it die out on its own, because we know the history. We know the immediate past of how this thing works. So let's just leave them alone and let the thing die. So they bring the apostles in and they get their last lick, right? They still beat them, but they don't do anything else. And it says that they heeded his advice. Gamaliel spoke his wisdom. There are some times, I don't know how it's going to show up on the screen, but if you want to show that first thing with one guy standing amongst thousands. Yes, y'all are wrong. There are some times, and for you, when you're standing in your community, right? Rapid City, you're standing in your community, Rapid City. You're standing in Cordell, and you feel like you're all by yourself. You're in Chelsea, and you go like, listen, y'all are wrong. There's a better way to do church. There's a better way to save lost people. There's a better way to preach the gospel message. There's a better way to reach our community. There's a better way to do church. Yes, y'all are wrong. And then here's this guy, Gamaliel, on the opposite side. He's the opposition. He's even saying, y'all are wrong. Just leave these guys alone, because if it is of God, you're in a lost battle. You're on the losing side. So let's just leave these guys alone. So two things today, right? But they're connected. On one side, what I'm saying to you is this: you need to be standing amongst the thousands and say, yes, y'all are wrong. Let's change the way we do church. Let's reach a lost community. Let's reach hurting people. Let's reach those people that don't. It's amazing to me what the excuses that we hear people say, right? Well, I'll start going to church when I get my act together. Right? I mean, how many times have we heard this stuff? I don't like going to church anymore. The church just wants my money. I mean, the amount of excuses. And if you and I simply do what we've done and what every other church in the world is doing, how are we any different? I want to be that guy. You know, a youth leader way back in the day, back in the 80s, Mike Yaconelli. Anybody know that name? Mike Yaconelli. He wrote a book one time, and he said this. He goes, you know what? One day I was so annoyed because my neighbor's dog just kept barking and barking and barking. Do you ever have that neighbor who's got the barking dog? Are you the neighbor that has the barking dog? You know, the dog that just keeps barking and barking. And here's what Mike Yaconelli said. At first he says, I got mad. And then I began to realize, you know what? I want to be a barking dog. I want to be relentless. I want to make sure that I've done everything I possibly can to save the next lost person in my community. I want to be a barking dog that never shuts up. Yes, y'all are doing it wrong. Let me tell you another side of this story. I want to tell you about a guy named Benjamin Falloy. Benjamin Falloy, I'll show you a picture of Benjamin Falloy. He's the guy who's on the left picture. He's the guy standing there alone, waving to the camera. On the right picture, oddly enough, he's on the left, and right is on the right. Okay, so obviously you can look at that and go realize, hey, if that's the right brothers, then that means that's the first plane, and you would be correct on your assumption. Let me tell you about Benjamin Falloy. Benjamin Falloy was a lieutenant. He actually enlisted in the Army earlier using his brother's name because he was 17 years old, because he believed in fighting for America, and so he wanted to fight in the Spanish-American War. So then he came back and he re-enlisted under his own name and joined the Signal Corps. All right, the Signal Corps. And so at that time, when the Wright brothers began aviation, the Signal Corps decided, hey, maybe we ought to investigate flight. And above all things, Lieutenant Benjamin Falloy was dispatched to go take a flight lesson. So he gets in a plane with one of the Wright brothers, and with no experience at all, the Wright brother is saying, hey, here's how you work the rudder. And so they're in flight and go, here's how you do, like do this. And he's doing this. He was sent to investigate, is flight a possibility for military superior dominance? Is it useful? Here's what happened next. He received orders, and here's what the orders said. Your orders are simple, Lieutenant. You are to evaluate the airplane, just take plenty of spare parts, and teach yourself to fly. How would you like to get those orders? Guess what? With 5 hours of flight time in the very first plane, he bought the kit for the government, came to Fort Sam Houston in San Antonio, put the plane together, took some spare parts, taught himself how to fly. He was one of the pioneers of military aviation, flying in the first plane with one of the Wright brothers. He crashed so many times it can't even be recorded. Most of his crashes were at landing. He was a terrible, terrible lander. One of his field commanders came to him one time and said, Floyd, we got to do something about this. So he went to one of the horses from the Army cavalry, and he took off a cinch strap and he strapped him into the seat. He goes, "This will save you." He broke all kinds of records: longest flight, highest flight, fastest flight, first harness, first seat belt. He changed out the skid plates to wheels. This guy did it all. Lieutenant, your orders are simple. Grab some extra parts. Teach yourself how to fly. God calls you on the shoulder one day, taps you on the shoulder and speaks into your life and says, your orders. You're going to go some town, never been there before. Grab a few extra parts. Plant a church. Teach yourself how to fly. It's an amazing thing when you and I think about it. I think someone was going to read Isaiah 40.
But those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint.
We've all heard it. Some of us have memorized it. We've all preached on it, or at least referenced it in a message. But when you compare it to Benjamin Falloy, it changes our whole perspective, doesn't it? See, we weren't just called to plant churches. We were called to soar beyond anything imaginable that God actually called us to do. Don't hold yourself back, guys. Don't think you've reached the limit. This guy changed out the plane, kept fixing planes, kept crashing planes. And all the while, he just kept telling his generals, we got this. We got this. We're going to dominate. He was the first guy to fly across international borders. He flew into Mexico to do reconnaissance. the first recon mission for the United States Army Air Corps. That guy. So Deuteronomy chapter 30, verse 9. Who's got that one? I don't know, whatever I gave you.
I call heaven and earth to witness against you today that I have set before you life and death, blessing and curse. Therefore choose life that you and your offspring may live.
Yeah. Other translations say what? Oh, that you would choose life. Oh, that you would choose life. Guys, that's what you and I are doing. On one sense, we're the one guy standing before thousands going, y'all are wrong. There's a better way to do this life. And there's a better way to do this thing called church. So let's do this thing. And let's teach others how to do what we're doing. And on the other side, we're going to soar and do things like nobody else has ever thought imaginable. And you are not done doing what you are called to do. You are still going at this. You're still starting this thing. I don't care if you're 6 years in, 8 years in, 10 years in. You are still starting in this thing. You still have a lot to do. Guess what? He had too many crashes to count. How many times have you already crashed? So buckle up. Get a leather cinch. Strap yourself in, because you're not done. And we have still got to soar beyond the imagination that God ever called you to do in the first place. So think bigger. Dig down. You're not done. Let's pray. Father, there's so many times I read these stories. I think, man, are we men like these guys used to be? 5 hours in the air. Yeah, I can put that plane together and go fly it on my own. None of us would think of doing that. I think most of us would have quit after the first crash. I ain't getting back up on a plane again. But Father, here's the thing that was not written about Major General Falloy. And that's conviction. We can write all we want to write about Major General Falloy. And Wikipedia can do all it wants to say about him as well. But what nobody records is the conviction of this man in his heart. His conviction, what he was convinced, without a shadow of a doubt, air superiority is going to defend America. And we have to be convinced without a shadow of a doubt that church planting is going to save lost souls. So, Father, today remind us of who we are. Remind us what you called us to do. Remind us that we are pioneers still in the year 2025, planting churches when most other men are fearful of the mere thought of starting a church from scratch. So, Father, may we soar beyond all imagination, beyond what we thought was capable. May you show us dreams and lead us in the right direction. Because sometimes we're going to stand there alone. Just like Jesus looking around said, anybody else want to leave? Y'all are wrong. So, Father, may our churches flourish. May we not give up. May we once again be restored with strength and vision. Let's go save lost souls. We pray all this in Christ's name. Amen.
been a great time being here with you guys. Did Josh do a good job? I would ask you guys to just stop for a minute. I'd love to hear what maybe stood out from the time with Josh. I'm going to run through some of the things Josh talked about as I took notes. These are the things that stood out for me, and then just I'd love feedback from you guys as to, is there a take-home? Is there something that stood out, had impact on you? Could we use radical prayer and fasting in our ministry more? How about crazy seed sowing? I had never thought about it, but Jesus was describing a stupid farmer. Nobody does that. Nobody does it, but God does, because that's how he farms. Or how to champion, equip, and release anyone and everyone in the church. Or to practice open-handed release of control, turning the congregation loose. Would that be a step in the right direction for us? Or he talked, I know what stood out to me, one of the things was that we need to reach the people we know, but I need to have a strategy for reaching the people I don't know that I won't find any other way, waiting for it just sort of to happen. Or sharing our story, figuring out a 15-second, because I'm kind of like him. I grew up so sheltered by the church and by my parents, I never had a chance to develop a testimony. Or teaching beyond or toward obedience, or his ideas about leadership development, the 2 groups, or the 139. So before I jump into my session, our last session, what stands out? What stands out to you? What stood out to you guys with Josh? What would be one of the key things? Willie, go ahead.
Just that piece of like, when we read scripture, then making that next, like, what am I going to do in response to that?
Yeah. What will I do in response? Obedience immediately. If you're doing the Bible studies process, what do you like about the passage? What do you not like about the passage? It levels the playing field for everybody. What's it tell us about God? What's it tell us about us? Levels the playing field for everyone in the group. Now, the one that's uncomfortable and the one that gets skipped the most is, how do I obey this week? And usually as the leader, I'm not wanting to go there. But that we all need to go there. So obedience. What else stands out? Back here in the back.
I think a couple of things. Number one, just that there is a true discipleship plan that is enacted. It's not just a kind of hope that this thing works. It's just put into place and constantly reproduced.
Yeah.
The second thing, kind of connected to that, is he's created a movement where people don't know any better.
Yeah.
Right? As soon as they respond to Jesus, they're brought on to mission.
Yeah.
And they think that that's normal.
They don't know better. Yeah.
Which it should be.
Yeah.
But that's the thing that stood out the most to me.
The story that stands out for me, I feel prompted to tell you guys. We had an elders meeting at my first church one night, and it dawned on us, we had cash. This was not our way of life. It dawned on us, we actually have money in the account, like several thousands of dollars, like over $40,000. It just sort of snuck up on us. Suddenly the congregation kept giving and we found ourselves with cash. And we actually had a pretty long conversation about what do we do? We've never actually had the option of having cash, And we talked about, we talked about we could hire a staff member. What would we hire? We talked about maybe trying to find another place to meet because we were in a rented school. We looked at options. And finally, I had the privilege of baptizing all but one of my elders. So one of them spoke up. And he says, well, you've been telling us that we have all the gifts in the body that we need. So why would we hire a staff member unless we're really driven to? And the only story you've told us in the Bible, because I had taught him, the only place we have mentioned in the Bible of where they meet was a rented schoolhouse, the School of Tyrannus. He goes, we're renting a schoolhouse. So his comment was, why don't we just put it into a church plant? Let's just assume he wants that done, and until he tells us otherwise, we'll just start new churches. He didn't know any better. It was a great day, great evening for me. Obedience-based, they don't know any better. Who else? Go ahead. Just a second, he's bringing you the mic.
I'm just going to give Richard his own mic next year.
Second. Hey, Seth, Nick, would you guys bring that whiteboard over? I just realized I can't pull that over on my own. Could you bring it over to the middle? Richard.
Model before you train.
Model before you train.
And model as you're training.
Yeah, I'd prefer not to. I prefer to pontificate from a distance. I'm seminary trained. That's how we do it. We can talk about nothing forever, and it feels really good that we can without actually having to. I'm sorry, guys. Would you put that back on the stage in the middle? I'm sorry. I did not give clear directions.
We didn't know any better.
I didn't know any better. That's right. Just did not know any better. And also, Greg's told a story from a war. During the Civil War, The Union troops never stood up to Stonewall Jackson. Everywhere Stonewall's troops would show up, the Union troops would flee the field. Until all of a sudden he ran into this one group of guys, they all wore black hats. There's a Union regiment marching down a road, and there was a railroad cut over here to the side, and these Union troops were coming along. They were known as the Black Hat Brigade, if you've ever heard of them. I think they came out of Wisconsin. They're marching along. They're a bunch of rookies. They've never been blooded. They've not been in a fight yet. They're marching along. All of a sudden, Stonewall's troops came over the railroad cut. His troops are accustomed to the Union fleeing. Those fellows just turned right and marched right to the Confederates. They got within, they say, about 60 feet of one another, and they just stood there taking shot after shot, shooting one another. All the officers were killed, and the soldiers never fled. And after the battle was over, for the first time, nobody really won, but Stonewall left the battlefield having not won. And the Union was interested, what caused this? And they discovered that what they'd been doing was they were taking troops out of seasoned units, which meant they had fled the field, and they were bringing them and inserting them into new units, thinking that this was going to teach the new units how to behave. Unfortunately, it did. They knew they could run. These guys had no professionals. They had nobody who had experience in their units. So they just stood there and did the one thing they knew how to do: shoot back. It's great leading a group that doesn't know any better than to do whatever God gives us. Sometimes we're better off with people who don't know jack. Right? Other insights. I'll shut up. Other insights. That's something that stood out from the training you could take home from Josh. Just a second. Okay, we'll be back to you. Yes,
their system for not just calling for radical obedience, like immediate, but also for like following up. And
yeah, immediate obedience.
the follow up, though.
Yeah. I prefer the no obedience, but yeah, slow obedience is no obedience. Yeah, I think we had one over here, Andrew. You have to run all the way across. Yeah. Yeah, it says that in Genesis, it points out that Abraham was told, let's circumcise the boys. And it says immediately that day. I would have liked to have thought that over. Although that's probably one that you don't want to stop and think over. And so, go ahead.
I just have some quotes that resonated with me. The first one was, a promise of Jesus is that his burden is light. If you feel ministry is heavy, you've probably picked up things that were never supposed to be yours. The next one was, there's only two kinds of lost people. The next one was, if our why is not centered on the heart of God, we need to recenter. And then there's, when I try to be the Holy Spirit, I suck at it. Yeah. That one was like, ow. Yeah, and learn to let go.
Yeah. All right. Well, I want to dive into the topic of how to create shared vision with a team, because not every leader benefits from having shared vision with his team. Sometimes leadership is done in such a way that it's not shared, it's dictated, it's delivered from above, it's transported into the situation from outside, and it's really not got the advantage of everybody being on the same page. Visions are fragile. There's a quote by Andy Stanley on the sheet you've been handed. Visions are easy to criticize, true. Visions attract criticism, true. Visions are difficult to defend against criticism. Absolutely, that's the very nature of a vision. It's not here. So anybody can look at it and say, nah. So we were starting our first church, and we would go once a quarter or so to a directors gathering of all the Chicago district churches, and they would have us have pie and cake and coffee. They'd march us into the sanctuary, and they'd talk about church planting. They'd have us as church planners get up and tell what we've done in the last month or last quarter, and then they'd have us go to the corners of the room so people could come pray for us. So they sent me to the corner of the room, and I had just presented, here's how we're going to launch our church. And we were going to do a telemarketing campaign, call 20,000 households, try to get 2,000 families, show some interest over the phone, mail out 5 pieces of mail to each of them, and then have our first service. I'm over in the corner, and the first guy that walks out to me, he's supposed to be praying for me, goes, you don't really think that's going to work, do you? I'm 27 years old, and I'm sitting there going, oh, I was hoping so. Visions are awful easy to criticize because you don't really have any way of protecting them. And visions often die at the hand of critics. And you've seen it happen. That's why you need to have a shared vision around you. You need a team around you that's ready to go to war with you. And you got to bring it along, though. So there's value to shared vision. It focuses the energy. I'm accustomed oftentimes to arriving in a group of people and everyone's kind of doing their own thing, but sometimes you can cast a vision and all of a sudden everyone's heading this way. It focuses the energy, it builds morale, gives you a chance to have a win and another win and another win. Just any small win sometimes is a huge win. It creates a sense of ownership. You know, we were at our first church, had our first service. We were about 8 weeks in, meeting in a movie theater that sat 450 some people in fixed seats, and we were averaging maybe 80. And half of those were kids. So I had like 6 people on stage leading worship, and then myself, and then we have all the teachers. So by the time we actually had all the kids leave with the teachers, I have 450 chairs, and there's maybe 30 people out there. It was painful. It was painful. But I remember my boss came and he was there one Sunday, and as he was leaving, he said, let's buy lunch. He took us out for lunch. He says, an important thing happened today. The pronoun changed. I said, what? He goes, I was talking to a couple of the leaders. It was Al and Joe. Barbara will remember Al and Joe. It was Al and Joe, and they were talking to Bob, my supervisor, and he said, they changed the pronoun. It was no longer your church. It was no longer his church. They said, we've got this. This is ours. And they told Bob, he's young, but we've got this. I had shared vision, finally. I had people who were on my side. It creates ownership. Shared vision creates and breeds courageous action. It's easier to do something stupid if other people help you. And some of us could give testimonies. I'm looking at a guy right now. I bet you've got some stories of doing stupid stuff. But other people helped you in the process. Yeah, that guy right behind you probably helped you on it. Yeah. It breeds courageous action. It allows, shared vision, allows you to challenge old paradigms. How old is Fourth End College Church? 130 years old. Have you challenged a few paradigms? The pews? Yeah. The last standing elder, as I understand it, his mother came up to me on Sunday morning. I preached for them this weekend, and she made it very clear she didn't care much about the music, but she did have a smile on her face. She was liking what was going on, but she wanted it to be on record that she does not care for this music. But they're challenging old paradigms, and you're getting away with it because you got a team. You got shared vision. It encourages experimentation. It's okay to fail fast if you got a team around you, because together we can recover faster. And we've got to have that attitude. And very important, it fosters a long-term commitment to have a shared vision, to have a way of moving forward together. So here's my question. Why in the world would anybody want to move forward without shared vision? And that's not a rhetorical. I'd love to hear from you guys. What would be the possible reasons why a leader would decide, I'm not going to take the time to foster a shared vision? I'm not going to make the effort to bring everybody on board. I'm not going to take the energy to create a sense of we're in this together. What would prompt a leader to move forward without shared vision? Because leaders do. But leaders usually have reasons for what they do. So what might be the reasons? Seriously, what comes to mind? What's that? Control. They don't want to lose control? Yeah. What else? Fear? Unpack that one for me. Who said it? Okay, go. That's Richard again. No. I love your Sharon. Fear.
I have it in my head.
Mm-hmm.
I don't trust that it will happen the way I think it will happen if I.
Okay. I've got it. I've already got it figured out. I know exactly how I want it. We had a daughter church, and I remember he lost his worship minister. And I was really hacked because, one, I hated that they lost the worship minister, but what hacked me even more was one of the other churches in the region got to him before I could. Had I known he was available, it would have been really, really awkward, but I would have gone for him. And I'm like, what's going on? He goes, the church planner was accusing him of not sharing the vision. And when I dug into it with the church planner and him, this is a daughter church out of our church, when I dug into it, it came down to the point he wasn't doing the songs in the order the church planner was wanting them done, and the number of times they would repeat different reprises. I mean, it was that detailed that the worship leader was getting. And the church planner was like, he's not buying into the vision. And I'm like, dude, you're never going to hire good staff if that's going to be the level of your leadership. Why else might it be that we're willing to move forward without shared vision? Willie? Yes, explain that, the imposter syndrome.
I don't know that I'm really capable of doing this.
Yeah.
So if I send forth a vision, what if it's not right? What if
Okay.
it's not good? What if I'm just pretending this and somebody calls me out on it and it turns out that I was wrong and I'm a fraud?
Yeah. Is Willie the only person in here that has a voice in the back of his head that says, you don't have a clue what you're doing, and if you're not careful, they're going to realize that? Yeah, okay, all right. Willie's voice is not in the front, it's right there. It's right there. It's right, yeah, all around him. Anybody here wrestle with the imposter syndrome? I do regularly. You can't avoid it. It's too tempting to move forward without shared vision, but it's not worth it. What do you lose if you're not moving forward with shared vision? What's at risk? What are you leaving behind? Think about it. Do you decide to push forward without a sense of shared vision with your team? What are you leaving behind? Yes.
I heard a quote recently that said, a burden shared is half a burden, and a joy shared is twice the joy.
A burden shared is half a burden, a joy shared is twice the joy.
And you lose both of those things.
Okay.
Try to do it yourself.
If you do it yourself, you don't have either.
Yes.
Okay. What else?
More of one and less of the other.
Okay. Yes.
You lose efficiency.
You lose the efficiency of having the whole group behind you. Yeah. Yep. What else? Okay. Yeah. All right. So if you say your vision out loud, you're accountable. Now you have to at least try, because you can fail faster and recover faster. But if you don't cast the vision, you don't have accountability. Yeah.
You could be leading an army of one.
Yes. You've got an army of one. And I don't really want to be in an army of one, because I've seen the one perform. All right. What else? What are we leaving behind? Pragmatic things. Impact. You're leaving cash on the table. If I'm going to plant a church, I need people around me. If they're going to be around me and be invested, they're going to have to be invested. And if I'm not casting and creating a shared vision, I'm leaving cash on the table. People who want to play bring cash with them. And when they get a little older like I do, they still use checkbooks. And they've got cash available. Is this making sense? And so I want to bring the people who I know have cash along with me, because somewhere along the way, I'm going to need somebody to open up a pocketbook and pay for dinner. I'm leaving cash behind if I don't create a sense of shared vision. What else?
You may only get the early adopters and leave everybody else behind.
Yeah. And the challenge is, if you look at change management theory, the early adopters often have offended all the rest. So you really, in some ways, you're at risk if you propose a new idea and the early adopters jump in. Those people who are the late adopters are like, those crazy people fall for anything. And so you actually undermine your credibility if all you get is the early adopters. You need to bring some of those mid adopters along with you so that they can bring they champion those people. They bring them along. And again, they bring cash. And you need cash. I mean, we need the Holy Spirit, but the Holy Spirit typically wants us to have cash too. Yeah. What else are we leaving behind?
The next generation of leaders.
The next generation of leaders. Yep. Anything else come to mind? I can only think of one more right now for myself. Yeah.
Just more of the impact of disciple making that's happening. So
Okay.
if you're, I'm looking at that like the compound interest type
Yeah.
of analogy, towards like when you got more and more towards the 1 to the 3 and then the one to the 3.
All right.
And the 9 towards.
You don't have a setting. If you don't bring people along, you don't have a setting in which the discipleship could even start to occur. All right. Yeah. Yep. Thank you. Burnout. You're risking burnout. I'm going to mention one more. You're risking leaving the strongest leaders behind. I think I've shared with different groups of you before. We had a guy named Bob start attending our second church. And he showed up. His wife hadn't yet moved to the community. He was an early arriver. She sent him ahead and she gave him the task, I found out later, of finding a church, because he would never go to church. So she said, you find one. He's an entrepreneur. He had started medical companies his entire life. And I didn't know it, but at the time he was starting an HMO or something like that of dental practices in Chicago. They had bought over 90 dental practices, and he was forming an HMO. I don't understand what exactly goes on there. It sounded pretty involved to me. He takes me out for coffee like 3 times and doesn't tell me why we're meeting. I keep thinking there's bad news, there's a divorce pending, what's going on? And finally he looks at me and goes, here's what I do for a living. And he goes, I've never seen a church grow this fast, this quick. And we had really not grown that big. We were pushing close to 300, but it was after about 9 months. And he goes, I've never seen a church grow this fast. And he got quiet, put the coffee cup down. He goes, you need my help. Now, by that point, I knew I needed his help. That wasn't the question. I just didn't know him well. But I decided, okay, how could you help me? Oh my gosh, he became my right-hand guy. He was my protector. Nobody could touch me because they'd face the wrath of Bob if they came after me. You're leaving your best players behind if you don't give them a chance. Is Michael Jordan going to want to play on a team that doesn't let him play? You know, is Luka going to be happy playing with LeBron if he can't get the ball occasionally? If you're going to have a strong team, you need to have a strong team, and that requires that we create shared vision. And I think we have to find ways of doing it. There's different ways of casting vision. It's here on the sheet down there in the bottom left. There's 5 different ways. You tell. One way to cast vision is just simply tell. Here's the decision. You announce it. This is the way it's going to be. You should probably leave if you're not going to like it. There are occasions in church planting when you have to be like that. People will come up to you after services and, are you going to be a spirit-filled church? Yes, if you understand where I'm going with that. And we're not that. That's not who we are. And I'm not saying, I'm not picking it out on any purpose. It's just at certain points on theology, you have to tell. It's not up for grabs. This is who we are. Sometimes you make a decision and you sell it. And church planters, especially high D's or high I's, any of those in the room? High D's and high I's tend to want to tell and sell. And then sell, then they tell a little bit more and tell, then sell. And it's like listening to a 2-string banjo at some point. It gets a little old. You got to move beyond telling and selling. So sometimes they start testing. They make a decision, show up and say, here, I've decided to do this, but I'd be interested in your input. Now, when did the decision already get made? It was already made. They're just trying to be nice about it. And that's okay. There's a time to test. There's a time to consult. You present the problem and you invite feedback, and then you make the decision. But who's making the decision? Well, the leader is. So who's making the decision in telling, selling, testing, and consulting? The leader. But sometimes you're in a group with leaders that are capable enough. It's time to kind of release the control. You're not abdicating leadership. You're actually leading if you bring them to the table and let them have a chance to speak into it. And that's called creating shared vision. It's worth fighting for. And one of the tools we use, and it's on the sheet, and if you want to, would you please go ahead and put that up on the screen for them? You've got the picture of a funnel on your sheet, but it'll show up on the screen here in a minute maybe. One of the tools that I've found useful with my own team back in Chicago, and I find it useful with church plants occasionally when I'm doing just an intervention or a coaching session or just trying to get a feel for how the church is going, is to draw the funnel and just doing a quick evaluation of what's happening. Because the way church works, this is so cool. Isn't that the darndest little thing here? David, you did this because you're my height, right? I love this. So we have a funnel. Think of church as a funnel. This is going to be so cool. Look at that. I could play here all day. David probably just goes to the office and plays around with this thing. I would draw a whiteboard like this with my team, my staff, our leaders, our core leadership team. Occasionally it was just helpful, and it might be helpful like Willie, this would be a tool maybe to use with your team on the way home even, or Mike with your team. I know you guys try to evaluate things. Sometimes we just draw the funnel and basically say, how are we connecting with lost people? Because there's 4 things a church has to do and do well. And if you're doing something that doesn't fit into one of these 4 buckets, you ought to stop doing it. One of those is connect with lost people. Once you've connected with them, you want to connect them into the church family. They got to build relationships. Following me so far? Then third, you connect them with what we believe, what we value. We have to acculturate them into who we are. And then finally, we connect them with the mission of God. If we're doing something that doesn't help one of those connections take place, we should stop doing it. But how do we connect with lost people? Outreach is hands-on activity. How are we hands-on connecting with people? Marketing is impersonal. No relationship. We just get the information out there. So out of curiosity, let's just do a quick evaluation. What do you got going on lately right now that you've been doing for hands-on connection? Anybody just throw some ideas out real quick. What are you doing? Are you doing anything up in Rapid City yet where you're yourself trying to make contact, or you're trying to get your team to make contact or do any kind of hands-on connections? Adventure groups where they're inviting their friends to them? Okay. Yep, yep. Yep. Our best friends, Tim and Kathy, they invited everybody on the cul-de-sac to a launch team meeting, and nobody came. And Kathy said, great, we're those neighbors now. Although, over the next 6 months, everybody showed up to church at least once. And we had a chance, because hands-on, they went out and tried to do outreach. You walked the streets, didn't you? You knocked on doors. Anybody else trying to knock on doors? It's worth doing. What are some other things? Chris, you got anything that you're getting your people to do that's sort of a hands-on effort to try to connect with people?
I think our best one is every July we hand out backpacks.
All right. All right. So basically, you're grabbing your people, and sometimes you're going out into the community. And you would just want to ask yourself, how is this going? So with the staff, we would just take the whiteboard and say, what have we got done? And what do we have planned for the next 6 months? And usually it was the most common thing in the world, unfortunately. I'm a professional, but I don't always do it well. The most common thing in the world was to all of a sudden look at our funnel and realize we have nothing planned for the next 6 months. We're running the church down here, and we're invested in all the stuff we do as a church, but we forget all about we're trying to connect with lost people. So we just do an evaluation as to hands-on, what's happening. Impersonal, what's happening right now with our churches that's sort of impersonal? We're not actually touching anybody, but we're making contact with the community in an impersonal, at a distance way. Facebook, all right. Social media in general. Anybody doing TikTok? I'm not even sure what it really is, but I'm pretty sure I'll not be doing that. Any other things that are impersonal? Billboards? Flyers in the little coffee shops? Anything you're doing in Cordell that's kind of impersonal? Is there anything you got going that reaching a small community? Okay, it's mostly social media. The question is what do we have to do in order to get our people out there? So we were launching our second church, and we had made a mistake with the first church that I determined wasn't going to happen again. At my first church, wonderful people, if I really pushed them on marketing and outreach, or let's try to reach lost people, at some point one of my leaders would finally reach into his back pocket, pull out his wallet, and say, what's it going to cost? Because they interpreted outreach as mailers rather than them doing something personal. Does that make sense? So we decided with the second church, we're not letting that happen. So we just decided as a launch team, shared vision, we talked about it, we decided that for everything we did that was impersonal, to reach the community and let them know we were starting a church, we would do 5 personal touches. Barb, do you remember any of those personal touches?
We had the kids event
Okay.
in the community.
She had a big bounce thing, and she would do a kids event, and kids would come out and play. Okay. Community parades. I don't know if your community ever has a parade, but we had community parades. Yep. We ordered little suckers that had you remember the little clear candy suckers with the little rope loop? And they were in cellophane, and they had the name of the church on the outside, and we were on a little wagon that we were pulling through the parade, and they said, do not throw candy, but we threw candy. And we covered the community, and those little cellophane wrappers that said Heartland Community Church were all over the community. They got blown into everybody's bushes. Yes. So yeah, we did freezer pops, handed them out at the community event. And Spark and I decided nobody's reading our stuff, so we had the bright idea of taking the freezer pop and stapling our information to the freezer pop, which was a great idea until somebody pointed out, because I'm not a real good dad, little children holding freezer pops, they melt. And we just put 2 holes at the bottom. So every child at the event, all these parents had little children with freezer pop all over. They remembered us. And so every one of these, we determined we were going to do a certain number of these to make up for it, because we wanted personal touch. Is this making sense? I'm trying to create, as I'm doing this with my team, I'm trying to create a language, a venue, a setting where the team can look at it and say, what could we do together? I want shared vision. I don't want me coming in and saying, hey, I've been thinking about this, here's what we're going to do. I mean, if I got a stupid team, I guess I could do that. But if I got a bright team, they'll help me come up with the ideas if I'm willing to ask for their help. So we do that. And then at a certain point, we're gathering them into some kind of a setting, And most of us are probably doing our gathering on Sunday mornings. Is that correct? How many of us, just raise your hand, see yourself as being a Sunday morning centric? That's primarily where you expect to meet people and connect with them. Okay, is there any here that would say we're going to try a different approach? Yep. Okay. Blade, I'm thinking you are. I'm thinking you're more of a group centric. So when you do your funnel, you might here say you're a group centric gathering as opposed to a large Sunday morning gathering. I grew up in the Sunday morning gathering. It's more comfortable for me. I'll probably never really get into a group. I don't know if I could lead that instinctively, the other. But I see more and more of our guys trying to do that, and they're doing it. But then the question becomes, what happens in this gathering? What's most important? What do we need to really have happen on our gathering that is most important? Nathan? Pick on you first. What do you really want to have happen on Sunday morning? I think you raised your hand. You're a Sunday morning centric. That's where you expect to touch them. That's not all you want, but that's where you're probably going to encounter them. What do you want to have happen there?
Well, we tell our church, regardless if you signed up for the hospitality team, if you're a venture, you're on the hospitality team.
All right.
It's a sin if you see somebody standing alone or sitting alone, go engage in a conversation. So we want to roll out the red carpet for every visitor, be blown away by the relational touch, which in Houston, it's so big and machine-like, that's unique to them.
All right. That's a marker for you on Sunday morning. What's another marker?
Gospel.
All right.
To hear the gospel.
All right.
You're going to get them there, it's got to be the gospel.
All right. Anything else stand out?
Two main things.
Okay. Anybody? What else would you add to that?
Vision we call that the guerrilla warfare welcome team.
Okay. The guerrilla warfare welcome team. Everybody's recruited. I heard vision.
Yeah, vision cast.
All right. You're painting a picture of where we're going. I remember being at Greg's church. First time I think you had me come preach, and you were in the new building. And at the end of my sermon, you got up. And I remember you basically just said to the congregation, hey, several months ago I told you that when our offerings went up, I think it was like $600 a week at that point. When our offerings went up $600 a week, we could move our children's minister and youth minister from quarter time to halftime. And so you got up and announced, we've done it, had them both come up, congregation went nuts, sat back down. I'm thinking he's going to close out the service. And he said, no, Greg's not done. He goes, now, if we can get our offerings from here to another $800 a week, here's what we can do next. And I'm thinking, I never thought to do anything like that. That's vision casting. And you probably do that on a regular basis. Yep. What else needs to happen in our gathering? Anything stand out? Yeah.
Connect people
All right. Connect them where? To each other?
each other and
Okay.
the next steps.
Okay, yeah, next steps. Now, the reason I'm stopping and just camping here is it's awful easy to get into the pattern of doing whatever it is we're doing on Sunday without asking, are we getting the most important things done? And what do we need to tweak now? So the question really becomes, as a staff, what needs to happen on outreach and marketing? What needs to be improved or worked on in our gathering? Are we becoming cold? Are we becoming so caught up in ourselves that we're not making connections with others? Tracking with me? With a group-based approach, I'd be curious, Blade, what would be some of the things you're looking for? I think yesterday you made a comment that everyone was sitting in circles, and you're really maybe wanting to have more of a dialogical, conversational dynamic happening, as opposed to sitting and listening.
We do the DBS,
Okay.
open it up for times to be thankful, prayer together for things that we're stressed out about.
Okay.
Obviously, the obedience piece at the end.
Mm-hmm.
And just fostering those relationships right now.
Okay.
But more than anything, right now, we're just training people how to share their faith. with
Okay.
the Word.
All right. All right. So yours is not so much a lecture and teaching as a training in how to do something. All right. I can see that blending itself in a group-based. I'm not trying to advocate either one of these. What I'm advocating is for the sake of shared vision, there needs to be a way, Jesse, or whoever, any church planner here, Ryan, there needs to be a way that you can get your people to a whiteboard, get your people to a conversation where you're starting to evaluate what we're doing as a church, what needs to be worked on next. And if you can get them coming alongside and helping you, you got teamwork. You got shared vision. You might all of a sudden discover there's cash that's suddenly available that wouldn't otherwise be available. You know, Barb and I are pretty old-fashioned in our giving. We believe that we're supposed to give a disciplined type of gift every week. We bring it on a weekly basis. She writes the check, I fold it and put it in. She folds them badly. So I fold it, I put it in the offering plate. She has the pain writing it. I feel the pain when I give it away. And unfortunately, there are weeks that I do feel pain because I want to take it and do something else with it, but it's the Lord's check. That's the first type of giving. Second kind of giving is the free will offering above and beyond. It's awful hard to get free will offerings out of me because I'm stingy. But you can get money out of Barb, especially if it has anything to do with children. She's a softie for that, right? Then the third kind of giving is where Barnabas sold the family farm and gave it all away. You're going to have a hard time talking me into that one. But you can get Barb to do part number 2. My point is, if you can get your people working on what do we need to do next to make this work on Sundays. We did focus groups with lost people, friends of our people. They weren't attending church. We did focus groups with them before we started our second church. And in the focus groups, we asked, if a new church were starting in this community, what would it have to be doing if it was going to rock your world? And they basically came back and said 3 things. Children's ministry needs to feel safe. That seemed to be really big in Chicago. We need a safe environment. The music better sizzle. That's actually what they said. And they said, Phil, you need to be interesting. And one of my best friends who now lives near us in Dallas, they moved down near us. I remember Dave looking at me during the focus group all these years ago, and Dave said, I don't care if anything you preach about is true, you just better be interesting. And I thought, that's our people. They don't even believe there is truth. He just wants to be, at least, I'm going to sit here and listen, you better be good. And so we knew what we had to focus on first. But then, at a certain point, let's focus on hospitality. Or at a second point, let's focus on next steps. Or at a second point, let's focus on small groups. So we figure that out and we try to make that connection. Where we're wanting to get is we want to get our people. Notice how well and easily I just adapt myself to this. We want to get our people into groups and teams. Now, theologically, I think we're supposed to do it from a perspective of when the Holy Spirit moves into people, he basically has 2 agendas for us. He wants to produce the fruit of the Spirit, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness, self-control. He also wants to release the gifts of the Spirit. He does the fruit through small groups. He does the gifts through ministry teams. And so if somebody starts coming to church, how do I get them there? So what's your current strategies? What are you guys trying right now to move people from they're showing up on Sunday or they're showing up into a group? And you may, Blade, again, you may be group-centric at this point, and then later you have to have gatherings to bring them together to create identity, to create values, to create a sense of we're in this together. What are some of the things that help us get people into groups? Because my experience was, maybe you can tell me you found it differently, Willie. My experience is people will come and hang out on our Sunday morning gathering for months. Irregularly, but still for months. Getting them to take the step into a small group or to join a team, that's a challenge. So what do we do as what are our strategies that might be working? Blade?
I think in the past, I fell into the trap of being on the make a decision and announce it.
Yeah.
When it came to
Mm-hmm.
groups years ago, like, hey, you need to be in a group. But then it stopped there.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it's amazing what just a simple invitation does.
All right.
We're like, hey, Chris, we're meeting Wednesday night at 7 o'clock.
Yep.
Like,
Personal touch.
yeah, just a
Personal, yeah, absolutely.
I'd say along with that too is more than one. Like if we have guys that I invite to group, but then Ryan invites them as well, and then Eric invites them.
Mm-hmm.
That is way more significant because they feel like, hey, here's some guys who actually want me to come mentor.
Yeah.
Not just the pastor trying to pad some numbers or
Mm-hmm.
that. Like that, we have seen people show up because I haven't invited them, but because Ryan invited them.
Mm-hmm.
He's,
Now, do you hold each other accountable to this?
yeah, I tell Ryan all the time he needs to do better.
All right, all right. And that probably makes all the difference in the world, doesn't it, Brian? And, yeah.
Part of the church vision to make Brian do better.
There you go. This is the part where from my coaching perspective, Greg, you may have a different opinion. I'd be interested. When I've been coaching guys in the past, my experience is you win or lose the battle in here. I call these the baby steps. Trying to get somebody to jump straight from attending a Sunday morning into a group on Thursday night where they're meeting 3 times a month indefinitely or for some period of time, that's a big ask. But asking them to do something first, some small thing first, then we can get them. Asking them to set up chairs, not that big of an ask. If I can get them there, it's easier to get them into a team now because they've started. I try to get them to do a baby step or a half step. Did I see a hand back here? Yeah, Matt.
Bill, one of the things that we've discovered is, and I train all my staff, all my leaders this, is it really comes down to, they'll always say, well, I went and asked so-and-so to do this, and they told me they'd get back to me, and I heard from them. And so what we end up doing is going back and saying, they're always upset because I can ask anybody to do anything and they'll do it.
Yeah.
That's because I build relationships with them. And so I've got my team every week. They have to come back to me with one person that they've had coffee with, one person without an ask, just getting to build relationships. They build those relationships, they can make an assessment of giftedness, and then they can ask them to come alongside them. And so it's that relationship key has been essential
Okay.
in getting people down the funnel.
Can I throw another idea past you? That I agree you build relationships, but you have another secret weapon. You're in the pulpit. It's hard for people to tell me no. They would tell my associate no, they'd tell Spark no, they'll tell Barb no, they'll tell other people no. But when I walk up and say, hey, would you mind giving this a thought? They can say no, but it's harder because I've got the FaceTime with them in the pulpit. Does that make sense? I feel sorry for staff members in churches who never get a chance on stage to start building a little bit of a relationship from stage, where in a sense you're staging them. You're sponsoring them. This is my staff member, don't tell him no. You know, but I think there's a power I had. It was almost like I could out-recruit the entire staff together, combined against me. I could out-recruit them. And one thing they did, again, towards shared vision, working with my staff, they got to where they kept a top 10 list of recruitment needs they wanted me to fill. So on a weekly basis, here's the new top 10. Okay, we did 3 last week, here's 3 more. It just kept me going, kept them focused, but we were creating a sense of shared vision as to what do we need to recruit next. We need 2 more people in the nursery. Okay, I'll go find them. Yeah, Brad.
I think one of those steps that we so often fail to do is express those expectations and clarify them. We tend to get satisfied with the Sunday morning gathering and don't express what those expectations are of how you deem the effect.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, when I visit your new church, and sometimes I'll ask, what's the next step? And I'll listen during the service as to what's the next step for somebody if they're brand new. If Barb and I just happened to wander into your church there in Rapid City, and we were new to Rapid City, what's the next step for us? Unfortunately, it's not uncommon that the next step that's mentioned, the only one that's mentioned is come again next week. Like, you got to give something beyond come again next week. And again, this is about building a sense of shared vision, a shared strategy, and agreed upon, here's how we're going to play the game. You don't want to leave the halftime coming back out and not having a clarity as to how you're going to play. Now, if you're the Kansas City Chiefs during the Super Bowl, that's exactly what they did. They came back out without any adjustment. And but it seemed, at least it seemed like that to me. But too soon? Not for me. It was... Yep.
There was a bunch of gear at the airport that was cheap stuff that was 50% off, in case you're interested.
Yes.
One of the things we do is short-term kind of special activities or focus groups.
Yes.
Needs.
Yeah.
Like, Josh just finished a finance class.
Yep.
We're about to start a parenting workshop series. Stuff that, focuses in
Yep.
specific.
Short-term. Yep. And the short-term missions, it's been my experience too, if you can get people to come and volunteer their time in a way that they're serving the community, not serving the church, but going and feeding the homeless or doing anything to try to serve other people, it's easier for them to volunteer once. And once they volunteered once there, they'll also start volunteering here, but they won't make the jump directly. Is this making sense? The context here is not to teach us how to do church. The context here is to use a tool like this. I'm just suggesting, I find this it has been for me multiple times, an easy way to get Tim involved in the conversation as to, Tim, what do you think our next focus needs to be as a church? Where do we need to put our energy? Because Tim can look at this and say, well, we're not doing anything on outreach and marketing. Maybe we need that next. What could we do? And you're then coming to the table with ideas as opposed to waiting for me to generate all the ideas myself. So we look for our baby steps, our half steps. We look for ways to bring people along. Yeah, a short-term class. We did a Growing Kids God's Way experience one time. How many couples were in that thing? Like 18 couples volunteered to join us for this god-awful experience. It was a videotape of this couple sitting there next to each other, and they had great ideas, but this couple sitting next to each other, and they're lecturing you straight through the video on how to grow your kids, and great ideas, but every time the wife would talk, he'd touch her and she'd shut up. Well, they called it the interrupt rule. The children were taught that if they want your attention and you're talking to another adult, just touch your daddy or mommy. We'll acknowledge you're there and we'll be right with you, but you don't take over this conversation. Great idea. But every time that guy touched his wife, she'd shut up. And finally, I got an unchurched group. After about 4 weeks of watching that, they're like, does he beat her? And I'm like, he looks like he does. And, but yeah, it never quite worked. She pinches. That's what she does. She pinches. Or leadership development. Now, I'm not going to stop here, but my point would be, at each point, you're just basically asking, what would be some next things we're doing? And if you can get a group of your leaders to help process this with you, you've got shared vision. And instead of you coming to them, telling them, or you making a decision and now you're selling them, or you're just testing it, or you're just consulting, if you could sit down with your leadership team and take a whiteboard and say, listen, here's what we're doing. Now, what do you think would be the most useful thing for us to do next? You can get your ideas on the table, but they can too. And all of a sudden, you've got a shared vision opportunity for them to own it. And they'll own it more if they own it. And they have a chance to speak into it. And ultimately, where I'd see us going with our God dreams, we have our 1-4-1-4. So you have a 1, the big global picture. Andrew, I can't remember what they're called, but the one that's way out there. Beyond the horizon? Did I do that right? All right, so you got a beyond the horizon picture. Maybe by 2030, we want to get here. And then you got your one big goal. Then you have 4 goals that then would be 2028. And then you have a goal for 2025. But right now, today, as of right now, Greg, you want to see your guys producing plans. So we're in February. Easter's coming up in April. So are you looking for a plan for Easter? Or are you looking for them to plan from Easter to the end of the summer? Or are you actually wanting to see right now their plans from the end of the summer through Christmas? You want to see from end of the summer through Christmas. This is your opportunity to sit down and say, these are the 4 things we're going to focus on during that window. Let's get ourselves ready and let's do this together. And it can create shared vision as opposed to just telling. Telling, selling, testing, consulting rely on the gifts of one person. Co-creating and doing shared vision relies on the gifts of several people. Guess which is stronger? Guess which will sustain itself? Guess which educates itself? They'll learn. If they help you make a decision and it doesn't work out, it's not you screwed up. It's, oh, that didn't work out. Let's fail fast, recover faster together, and let's try something else. If you can bring your people into a dialogue, into a conversation, into ownership, it's so much more fun. It's so much more powerful. There comes a time you have to tell. There comes a time you need to sell. No, we're doing it. There comes a time to test it or consult. But I think church planters need to learn to trust their leadership. And by that I mean 2 things. Danny, you got a leadership bone inside you. You're a strong leader. Trust your leadership gifting. But at the same time, trust the leaders that are around you. Because they're pretty sharp too. Or by the time you play with them, you teach them who you are, they'll become stronger all the time. Trust your leadership. So on your way home, at least with a couple of the teams, if you're a team, you're driving, what would be the top 4 things maybe? If you start at the top, What's the Forge been doing lately to get out into the community and touch people and have hands-on? What are we going to do between now and Christmas? And what might we do to change our marketing, to improve our marketing, or, put you on fans only or something like that, Willie? And not a good idea. I'm over 64, so I'm not sure the implications of what I just said. Yeah. Yep. And she's too far away from me to pinch me right now, so okay. Gathering. What's our priorities up there? What are we going to focus on next? Yeah, how do we get our people to become more hospitable? Okay, that's worth trying to figure out a game plan for hospitality. Or how are we going to have baby steps? Whether you're a group-centric program or a Sunday-centric program, you got to get them to move to the next level. Oh, by the way, where does discipleship fit in here? Where's the discipleship component? It's all through. Where's prayer? All through. Anything and everything ought to be taking us toward discipleship. Can we consider them discipled if they're not ministering? If they're not part of a team? No. So yeah, discipleship's all the way through. So what's our next steps? This is simply a way of having a conversation with your team that might actually put a plan together. So Spark and Tim and I were complaining one night to our leadership team. We didn't have an eldership yet, but Bob and his buddies were in a room. And Cynthia, I think, was there. She ran all of HR for Baxter Pharmaceuticals Corporation. Bob was doing his whatever he did with HMOs. Harry, my favorite, he now runs last I heard of Harry, had contact with him, he was running the plant out of Virginia where they produce Preparation H. I'm like, what a calling. And Harry was there. And so Spark and Tim and I were moaning and groaning and complaining about something. Something wasn't working. And Harry was sitting there, and he was running a factory in Chicago at the time. He got up, went to the whiteboard, drew the funnel without us prompting anything. He didn't draw the whole thing, just drew the funnel and said, that's where we're stuck. If you fix that, it starts working again. I'm staring at it going, oh. And then he says this, can we go home now? He was tired. He wants to help. He's showing up. He threw his idea on the table. He was right. Let's move forward. And guess who was helping us do it when it came time to do it? It was his idea. He's going to own it. He's going to bring himself to the table. Just an idea. Any feedback on this or suggestions? Always trying to improve it. You guys may have played with this before. You want to bring your people along. There are times to tell and sell. There are times to test, just consult. But if you're going to bring your best people along and you're going to surround yourself with very capable leaders, they're the type of people who are going to take you out for coffee and say, you need my help. And at that point, you need to be humble enough to say, how could you help me? And then they dive in. And you find out you're a much stronger team. And actually, they may be stronger than you. But that's okay, you're in charge. And they want you to win. So they're going to get behind you. You certainly don't want those people not behind you. You want them on your team. Father, help us to become leaders that embrace the challenge of releasing your people. We've been taught wrong in our churches that it's our job to do things. It is our job to release your body to do it. It's not my job, it's not Greg's job to go plant these churches, it's church planters' jobs. And then it's the people who are surround those church planters to help that vision come to life. And then maybe even speak into that vision themselves because they see things that the church planter didn't know. They've been in the community longer. They're closer to the pain. They have friends that are actually in deeper trouble than the church planter can see. And they want to help. Help us to let the people around us who want to help. Make us leaders who raise up leaders and release leaders. We pray this in the name of our Lord Jesus, who could have told us everything, but he seems to have decided to leave us on the hook for coming up with some of it ourselves. Amen? So there's two commissions. There's the Great Commission, go, As you're going, make disciples. But before that, there's what? An inner commission. Do what I've told you to do. Take the pilgrimage, go to that mountain and wait. Acts chapter 1 again. Acts chapter 2 doesn't come until Acts chapter 1 comes. If you try to force Acts chapter 2 before Acts chapter 1, you're not going to get Acts chapter 2. You're going to get something else that's a corruption. So we start with Acts chapter 1 because you can't get to 2 without starting with 1. You can't get to verse 18 of Matthew 28 unless you're willing to go to verse 16, which is do what I've told you to do. Meet me here. Wait. Experience me. Worship me. Okay. Go ahead and express your hesitation or your doubt or whatever it is. Now I'm turning you loose. It's not fun trying to do the outer commission without the inner communion. Let's pour ourselves into the inner communion.